The 90s were a time when many cartoons were made to make educational content for kids, and each had its own style of doing that. There were hour-long specials with the Looney Tunes warning us about drugs and other things, but they never really managed to pull it off. Then came Captain Planet out of nowhere and perfectly nailed the idea of a superhero who wanted to save the environment from various villains and elements with their storylines. Even though it sounded like a cheesy concept, it was one of the favorite cartoons from the 90s with a strong impact on the kids. Let's look at the anatomy of this ecologically conscious superhero, Captain Planet, and see all the hype about the Planeteers. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
You and our planet, so don't be a greedly. The power is yours!
Origins of a hero, forged when the Earth cried out. Unlike some of the common notions of superheroes that we witness, Captain Planet's story doesn't begin with the idea of a character and the powers he acquired. This superhero is more about his ideological structure. His reason for existing is what defines him. While most heroes come from the idea of a mythic lineage, radioactive accident, or even some extraterrestrial heritage, Captain Planet resulted from the global moral imperative. Conceived in the 1980s, when the public consciousness surrounding environmental issues had reached a threshold, Captain Planet became a response to the modern ecological collapse. So, if you delve deeper into the origin arc of Captain Planet, he was basically a summoned being, an elemental construct brought into existence through convergence. This was no experimental convergence or metaphysical process, but something purely orchestrated by Gaia, the spirit of the Earth. Gaia is the Earth's consciousness and was awakened due to years of rampant ecological destruction. She could have had a stronger role and intervened directly in response to all these factors. Instead, she decided to create a channel, an instrument through which a planetary defense could be manifested. Thus, a hero could be made out of harmony instead of the usual heritage arc that our other superhero friends follow. At a time when pollution and environmental collapse reached a catastrophic level, Gaia decided to awaken 5 youths from different continents, each with their ring that represents one of the classical elements: Earth for Kwame, Fire for Wheeler, Wind for Linka, Water for Gi, and Heart, yes Heart, for Mati. If you are surprised by the presence of Heart as one of the elemental powers, then it is worth mentioning that it was a deliberate and thoughtful decision from the character's creators. Each of the other elements, Earth, Fire, Wind, and Water, is a tangible element of nature, while Heart is the only one that is intangible and exhibits the qualities of empathy, compassion, and emotional connection. As Gaia emphasized, without a heart to guide them, the other powers are useless. So yeah, apart from being a completely different element on the list, Heart also provides guidance on other aspects. Now, each ring provided to the youth acts like a conduit, binding them to a force of nature, establishing a psychic and elemental link between the Planeteers and the planet. Each ring can give the wielder the powers to control a respective element. When they are brought together, they initiate a summoning. Captain Planet. Fans of DC might wonder about this character's unique similarity with another popular superhero, Shazam. Similar to Captain Planet's mythology, when a child who speaks a word, an acronym named out of the names of the divine patrons Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury, they are transformed into an adult superhero. Yes, there's the act of will playing a major role here and channeling through the magical tokens. It does bring them together, considering there are times when both superheroes, Captain Marvel, no, I'm not talking about the Marvel character, and Captain Planet are composite outputs of multiple wielders. However, a major difference here is that Captain Planet is neither an inheritance nor a result of something mystical. He is ecological. One of the biggest things to note about him is that his strength entirely depends on the power of the Planeteers and not their intent. The summoning fails if the Planeteers end up summoning him for some selfish reason or when they are not wholly in their moral alignment. Thus, he becomes a combination of both elemental energy and collective ethics. This dependence might seem like a flaw, but if you look closely enough, it becomes a symbolic and literal embodiment of unity, cooperation, and even balance, which Gaia kept primary in her design. Not much is known about the character, apart from these details, because there wasn't much clarity about his arc, apart from his appearance, since Gaia had summoned him, but some references hinted at a prior generation where Captain Planet might have been summoned.
This underground mineral deposit ought to provide the
Physical appearance. Living symbol of planetary harmony. None of the aspects of Captain Planet's character design look synthetic. Instead, every one of them is as functional as the other. The blue skin is supposed to signify the oceans, the Earth's dominant surface feature. Meanwhile, the green hair evokes forests, vegetation, and the biosphere, and the stylized red and gold globe emblem on the chest with the longitudinal and latitudinal grids is supposed to symbolize planetary unity. The musculature is mostly human, with some exaggerated features, but none is idealized through hypermasculinity. Even though he doesn't wear armor, his costume might give an idea of that, but this costume is more a part of his identity, and it is supposed to reflect his role as more of a non-biological entity. In fact, it won't be counted as a costume, considering he has no secret identity. Personality. Sarcasm with a solar core. Even though the target of the character is more about morals and other aspects, Captain Planet has a strong sense of humor and often makes puns and other jokes to taunt his enemies. But unlike Deadpool or Spider-Man, Captain Planet prefers to refrain from making a joke if the circumstance he is dealing with is much more serious. It actually makes sense, considering there have been scenarios where he has had to deal with situations where his enemy became the concept of drug addiction. Captain Planet also acts like a guide to the Planeteers, and even though he has immense power, he doesn't forget to remind the kids that all that power actually comes from within them, and that they have a lot more potential even without their rings. Elemental powers. Nature's ultimate countermeasure. The first thing people focus on when discussing a superhero is their superpowers and abilities that put them above other superheroes. But in that sense, Captain Planet might be difficult to analyze because the character was less of a traditional superhero and more of a mutable force of nature. No solid understanding of his power was ever indicated in the series, and that's why it allowed for elastic utility that helped resolve various crises, whatever the scale or complexity of the situation. Even though it might sound like plot convenience, the narrative ambiguity made him adaptable to any environmental challenge, be it an industrial disaster, a toxic villain, or a planetary threat. So, in a way, we can cover the basic abilities as physical prowess, elemental manipulation, transmutative potential, and a spiritual empathy that all go into a single construct of ecological defense. However, a closer inspection points out that Captain Planet can reshape the structure of any matter at will. Now, there might be a catch to this transmutation, but Planet's means to do that always go into direct problem solving. He can take any material that can act as a pollutant and turn it into something with some physical limitations that would prevent it from having the same impact. The true potential, or the limits of this ability, haven't been tested, but it won't be surprising to discuss them in leagues with the likes of Firestorm or Elemental Lad. Here are the 5 elements the Planeteers invoke, and you had better be ready with your avatar lore, because these are Earth, Fire, Wind, Water, and Heart. The extent to which these abilities can be utilized is a completely different subject, because every time we witness the abilities being exercised, it's always been beyond the classical bounds. Earth manipulation gives Captain Planet complete dominion over the terrain, stone, metal, and even crystalline materials. Thus, if you fight him on the land, he can raise a wall, encase you with earth, and even convert the solid surfaces into weapons for much more extensive attacks. The same thing is true for the other elements. He can use the fire manipulation technique to control flame and project heat, but the best one is that, just like our friend the Human Torch, he can embody fire and attack you with solar flares, or even plasma. He can incorporate these elements through water, ice, and air manipulation, including turning himself into water and gaseous forms, which might sometimes be necessary. Yeah, that's like one individual with a mix of abilities from about 5 or 6 mutants at the same time. But even then, it's not enough to comprise his full extent of abilities. In connection with his control over the abilities, he has also demonstrated plant manipulation, which allows him to grow vines and roots rapidly and then make botanical forms out of them that can evade any damage. Similarly, the control over these environmental features allows him to have weather manipulation abilities, Thus, he can combine all his elemental capabilities to create anything from a sandstorm to a hurricane. Each of these feats proves that Captain Planet might not be much different from the god-tier entities like Storm or Thor, who can also manipulate the weather. Along with these major abilities, Captain Planet has some other skills that work in parallel or are quite similar to the general appeal of a superhero. Flight is the common denominator for the character, and then there's the power to create lightning bolts and shoot charged beams at his enemies. Another cool power that has been featured quite a few times is his ability to teleport through beams of light. And it looks absolutely cool and serves as a rapid means of entering and exiting places of high risk. While most teleporters rely on gadgets to achieve this sort of movement, Captain Planet can just channel that ability. Also, Superman fans must note that just like the Man of Steel, Captain Planet can rejuvenate himself using solar energy, thus tying his vitality to the sun's energy cycle. Apart from that, there's the usual super strength, super breath, and other such abilities that clearly put him in the league of the likes of Superman and other such superheroes. But then there comes the variety of abilities that help him deal with the ecological crisis. And there we have telepathy and empathy, abilities channeled entirely through the heart. To respond to a particular environmental crisis, Captain Planet can sense disruptions that range from deforestation, poisoning, ozone depletion, or even extinction-level events that would otherwise have no tracking mechanism. Even though we hardly ever see him pilot something, he can command the Geocruiser, suggesting his basic proficiency with ecotech. If you look at the level of powers that this superhero wields, it almost feels like there is no end to him. But there is a particular reason that the character was built in that manner. Most superheroes would go into battles against their enemies, but Captain Planet is not at all oriented towards battle or domination. He neutralizes his threats in a very particular manner. He would transform the pollutants into harmless substances and restrain his villains instead of injuring them. Thus, it becomes clear that his objective is more about rehabilitation than destruction. Fans have often compared him to the Spectre from DC, a spirit of divine wrath, whose powers are calibrated to the scale of the moral offense. But the difference lies in the fact that Captain Planet is not punitive. He would never seek vengeance. Instead, he would rectify his enemy.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet!
Vulnerabilities. Cracks in the green armor. The immense powers of Captain Planet might make it feel like he is probably one of the most powerful superheroes ever created, but there's a lot more to this guy than these powers. Being born of Earth's natural forces, anything that contradicts or corrupts these forces is a clear threat to him. Even the weaknesses are clear metaphors of the ecological and moral framework. For example, one of his biggest weaknesses is pollution. It is a physical enemy to him that can end up incapacitating him, and unlike conventional heroes, shaking their enemy attacks off, pollution is like poison to Captain Planet. However, each type of pollution produces a different result, considering it is once again a metaphor for his physiology being deeply integrated with environmental purity. Similarly, his empathy can end up being used against him because there are times when an intense negative energy can leave him completely blind and vulnerable. A particular situation where we witnessed this was when Captain Planet had to travel back in time and he became visibly weak in the presence of Adolf Hitler. So this level of effect actually indicates how the metaphor is not limited to physical aspects, but corruption at the level of emotion and ideology, since they can be just as poisonous to the world. Since Captain Planet is very much linked to the Earth, going off-world, away from the biosphere, can turn out to be really difficult for him because it makes him weak. One such incident had him away from Earth and the absence of 2 Planeteers, stripping him of all his abilities, thus proving that he is the spirit of Earth. Apart from that, his personality can also prove to be a major flaw for himself, because there are times when he would arrive with his swagger, with a sharp tongue and unshakable confidence. In the process, he would end up underestimating his opponents. Even though it might sound like a weakness for an individual who has been given so much power, it makes sense to realize that this transition humanizes him instead of the godlike persona superheroes are often portrayed with.
I am Captain Pollution!
Captain Pollution, toxic reflection of a noble force. Captain Planet cannot be explained without going through someone who embodies his very antithesis, Captain Pollution. Like other major villains in the world of superheroes, Captain Pollution is brought into existence when the 5 eco-villains, Dr. Blight, Luton Plunder, Duke Nukem, Sly Sludge, and Verminous Scum create their version of the corrupted elemental rings, with the individual elements being smog, toxics, deforestation, hate, and radiation. While Captain Planet is driven by heart, Captain Pollution is only driven by hate, which lacks any type of balance. So Captain Pollution is not a dark mirror that becomes the basic idea of an arch-enemy, but his existence underscores the central tenet of the Captain Planet mythos. Hence, this indicates that something like environmental salvation is absolutely impossible until there's an emotional and moral investment.
I am Captain Planet.
Legacy, the superhero built for survival, not glory. At a time when the likes of Transformers and Power Rangers were all the hype, Captain Planet didn't manage to reach such a strong footing. Still, it's hard to deny that it had a strong cultural and ideological impact on the Saturday morning cartoon shows. When the rest of the cartoon shows were focused on advertising-driven programming for merchandising-fueled empires, Captain Planet became the anomaly and a deliberate countermessage. There weren't villains with death rays, but they were a lot more real. They were derived from humanity's addiction to pollution, greed, and short-term gains. To be fair, it became the only other character asking kids to get rings apart from Green Lantern, while the other shows were focused on getting them guns and other items such as merchandise. While others may comment about the shelf life, the true legacy of Captain Planet lies in the Captain Planet Foundation, founded by Barbara Pyle, which did something that the marketplace couldn't: convert the enthusiasm for the titular superhero into a real-world environmental action. Barbara Pyle ensured that the percentage of all the merchandising profits, which was already restricted due to the environmental standards, went directly to funding educational and ecological initiatives. At a time when Captain Planet didn't have any reruns on TV, the Foundation still managed to operate on the same guiding principles that it had originally. Recently, there has been a lot of hype about bringing the character to the big screen in response to the fan following the character has had over the years. However, each of these efforts have been either clumsy or indifferent and completely different from the source material and the original motive of the series. Back in 1996, there was a plan for a movie, and Pyle had shared her enthusiasm for the same, but it never managed to see the light of day. In the continuous battle between appropriation, symbolism, and commodification, Captain Planet failed to make the solid comeback he deserved. After hearing quite a few renditions of the pitch for a possible Captain Planet movie, Barbara Pyle has clarified that this thing has been lurking around for years. Did they ever even call me or Nick? No. Were they interested in knowing any of the depth of mythology that goes into Captain Planet? Not even remotely. People would tell me how happy and excited they were that there was going to be a movie, and I'd say, well, I'm not, because it's not going to have any element of what the series had, and it's all going to be made by the same people who brought you Transformers. But even though Captain Planet might lie in our memories as a show that once gave us an educational take on the superhero genre, there's a lot more to it that doesn't really do justice to the character. It reminds me of the episode where Planeteer Wheeler time travels to the future and finds everything absolutely collapsed because pollution had won. As the rest of the Planeteers tried to summon Captain Planet, they failed because they were no longer united. If we unite and work together, we can keep his spirit alive. Always remember Captain Planet's words of mortal transfer of responsibility. The power is yours. Marvelous verdict. At a time when people are talking more and more about different superheroes from the 90s and the 80s, and they are making strong comebacks, something as revolutionary as Captain Planet also deserves a comeback. I always imagine that it will be something like that time Alan Moore worked on the character of Miracle Man. Maybe the Planeteers are old and the world has changed a lot, but Captain Planet is still there somewhere, waiting to wake up and save the world. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.